Thank you very Thank you very much, Darren, and thank you to the Meyer family and everyone here at Yugle Bar. Rob and Lorraine Cinnamon, what a fabulous place to hold an open day and field day, and what a great sale day it'll be here with this wonderful facility. So congratulations to everyone involved. I'm here to talk about the beef sustainability framework, and there's probably a few blank faces around the room wondering what on earth it is and what it's supposed to do for the beef industry. So hopefully I can give you a bit of an explanation of what we've done. The need for an Australian framework for beef sustainability came about from the Red Meat Advisory Council in their strategic plan, and quite regardless of what they decided to do on an industry-based level, I think the industry sort of saw that it was time for us to do something, to have a little bit of a navel gaze perhaps, and have a look at ourselves in the mirror and question our warts and all, our good, our bad, our ugly, about the things that we do in the beef industry. And I think it provided an opportunity for us right across the value chain, from production right through to processing, to really look at how we do things and what we needed to change to continue market access being available around the world to us. I guess to maintain our resources for the next generation of beef producers and beef processors and beef feedlotters. And so it was sort of a point in time that we looked at to provide a report on actually snapshotting where we're up to and how we could improve our industry. So really that's what a beef framework is all about. This is how it was developed. We had a process that was 1 year long. We had industry consultation with all of our industry organisations, many of whom you've heard from today. The Red Meat Advisory Council drove this framework process, and we as a steering group were tasked with the job of getting it together, I suppose. We then spoke to customers, we spoke to our domestic customers, people who buy our beef overseas, we spoke to people who consume our beef. We spoke to financial institutions, investment houses, people who have an influence or an interest in our beef production. And that's everyone from, this morning you heard from Ian McConnell, from WWF, we spoke to RSPCA. So we gave a whole lot of people outside of our industry the opportunity to talk to us and give us some feedback on how they saw our industry. And I think that was the most valuable thing that perhaps our committee did. We got the opportunity to not go there as an industry organisation, trying to develop policy or trying to sort of, defend ourselves. We had an open door and an open discussion with all of these interest groups, and it was really enlightening to see that, and I think you might have heard from Ian this morning, that people like, or interest groups like WWF, want beef production to continue. They want it to continue in a very sustainable way, and I think that's the argument that I really want to talk to you guys about, or grassroots producers particularly, that it's not a conflict, it's not a difference of opinion. We all have the same objective, and that is that beef production should be sustainable. It's just a matter of how we get there. We then had a public consultation period, and then we provided our report to the Red Meat Advisory Council back in March, and that was a base report. It provided details of where the industry's up to, what sorts of things we've got data on that we can start to identify and report against in the future. And it really sort of looked at the big issues that those within the industry and outside the industry are actually interested in. So this is what it looks like, and you can go online, and I'll give you the website address at the end of the talk, but beef sustainability, we're asked to define what that is, and you can see, well, you may not be able to see a definition there, but it's all on the website. But we had to identify the big areas that are of concern to people. And they came down to animal welfare, the environment, the social or community issues, and the economic issues. And when you think about sustainability, probably you think really immediately about environment and about animal welfare, but it is so much more, and it's so well linked in together. Economics is linked in with certainly the social aspect. We want more profitable farms. More profitable farms make for better farmers with a better mental health view of the world, it all sort of interrelates, and there's some things we can't do because the cost is prohibitive. So, we'd all love to sort of have our cattle on sort of, padded grass fields and padded fences, and probably some of the things that Gina Reinhardt talked about is having a look from the outside into our industry and saying, well, what are those expectations of people outside of our industry? We can't always achieve the things that they want, but hopefully we can achieve some of them. When we looked at the framework, it wasn't all about the good. In fact, there was a lot of good when we started to look at the things that our industry actually does. We don't often talk about the positives in our industry. We're a bit self-effacing perhaps, and we tend to sort of cringe sometimes about, what people might think of us, or we've got a really good story to tell in Australia, and it was just timely, I think, for Australia to be able to tell that story. Neither is it all about black clouds. We're criticised a lot, probably within the industry and from the outside, from people who don't understand how and why we do things. And I think sometimes we just don't talk about the things we do because we think that, everyone's sort of quite critical of our industry. So Rob asked me to talk about the lessons I learnt from the sustainability group inquiries and setting up this framework. And I could talk all afternoon about them, but I sort of wanted to bring it down into it's almost like a SWOT process, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And within the beef industry, there's a whole lot of things that fit within each of those. And what the framework told us that those things that are threats to our industry, we really need to focus on those and make sure that we're doing something about them to continually improve how we do our work and how we manage. The big thing is social licence, and social licence is simply having approval, having acceptance from those who matter. And for me, in the beef industry, the people who matter most are our customers, our consumers. Now, without them, we're just breeding cattle for a hobby, because if we don't have that end user with confidence in what we're doing, we have no reason to be producing beef and cattle. Once again, the consumer is one thing, but also the community that we live in is another aspect to the social licence. You have a highly intensified sort of cattle production system, and then suddenly a town will encroach on that. And so that changes the dynamic of what the expectations of that community might be. So we've always got to be sort of thinking about this social licence in our land use, our water use, definitely our animal welfare, but also in our people, our health of our people, how we look after our staff, how we look after people within the industry. Do we avail them of information and education? So there's a whole lot of, as I said, there's a whole lot of things to social licence. It's not just about environment or animal welfare. It's about a whole raft of how we do things in our industry. One thing I did learn is that individual businesses are generally a whole lot better and a whole lot more flexible and faster to change than industry. And I think sometimes industry is catching up to some of those great champions, whether it be environmental or animal welfare. I heard today about a large company up north, MDH, doing these wonderful things with trials on pain relief, as are many producers across Australia. So it's those champions who are willing to step out of their comfort zone and trial things are quite often ahead of our industry organisations just because they're a little more flexible and they can respond to the expectations of those that we rely on. Another thing is the economics versus the social licence. I was at a genetics conference one day, and the chicken production people came and spoke, and they said, the science in chicken production is so far out here, it's glow in the dark. The chickens could glow in the dark if you wanted them to. But they've got to match that with where their consumers are up to. So, high intensity production is one thing. They know how the science works and how to do it. But it's the social licence of those consumers saying, we don't want chickens who, grow like that and you put a little bit of feed in and they just take off and they're however many grams per day weight gain. We want those chickens to have a nice life. We don't want them pumped with food. We don't want them pumped with antibiotics. So that's the closing the gap of social licence versus the economics, and it's a really important part to our sustainability. The other thing is, and I don't know, every Four Corners report, you wait for the previews of the Four Corners reports to think, well, what are they going to talk about this next week? But it's really easy to lose respect. And that's as an industry, and, those of us in seed stock production know that it's really easy to lose respect as a business as well. And you just do that one thing in a reactive or responsive way that's not quite right, and you've lost respect of community or customer. The threats diminish. I guess the process of the Red Meat Advisory Council was to sort of say, we've been overly reactive perhaps in the past as a beef industry. Let's get on the front foot. Let's start to talk about those issues that we don't want to talk about, that we hide under the blankets and sort of whisper in dark corners about. Let's talk about them and let's see if we can actually solve them together. And I guess it's always, when you get a family together at Christmas, it's a bit like that. There's always Uncle so-and-so who sort of, goes off on a tangent and you don't want to talk about him. But this is the uncle in the room. It's about talking about everything in our beef production systems. The other thing is this generation X, Y, Z and beyond. X, Y, Z and beyond. I don't even know what they call them anymore. Z is probably in primary school, I'm thinking. I don't know. But they care about where their food comes from. Some of the people we met with were the under 30s. They talk about food, they blog about food, they love meat. You go to any Sydney sort of hotspot like Surrey Hills, you'll get beautiful beef on a restaurant menu. They love meat, but they want good meat. They want to know it's been produced sustainably and ethically. These influencers, are getting their information from a whole lot of different places now. It's no longer the meat and veg and mum cooks in a certain way. They're learning from celebrity chefs, they're learning from Facebook and YouTube and whatever, so they're learning about food in a completely different way to what other generations did. Ethical food production is totally a given. They just assume that our beef industry does things ethically. And in the US we've seen ethical branding. So in other words, humanely raised beef in one refrigerator, which to me assumes that in the other refrigerator in Walmart or wherever it is, it's not ethically raised. And I think that's a real danger to our beef industry, that when you start marketing ethical food, it naturally assumes that anything not raised that way hasn't been properly raised or humanely raised. And also our industry needs to attract those people back into our industry. Young people need to come back into industry. They'll want to come back in if we're an industry where they think it's long-term and sustainable. So the big picture lessons, just to finish off. There's no end date to sustainable beef or sustainable production. What we found is it's an ongoing, expectations change, generations change, people change, communities change. So the beef industry has to flow with that change. We have to be completely looking at where we're at on a regular basis, reviewing what we do, the practices we have, how we communicate. It all has to change with the different expectations. Market access will respond to our commitment to sustainability either in a negative way or in a positive way. That's overseas markets, that's premium markets, it's domestic markets. Whatever it is, they will respond to how we treat sustainability. The framework has, and you heard from Ian again this morning, the framework's enabled us just to join our competitors. It hasn't enabled us to go ahead of them. The Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, the US, Canada, Brazil, Paraguay, have all joined that sustainable roundtable. They were all ahead of the game, I believe, until last year when we got this report. They say that the process that we went through in consulting everybody along the chain plus external stakeholders was the key to jumping ahead of other nations. So we hope that that's the case and that it continues on. I guess the opportunities to promote ourselves as sustainable is enormous. Everybody wants to hang their hat on something. It's no good to just be Clean and Green Australia anymore. We have to have the credentials, we have to have the data, and that's what the committee is currently doing. It's setting up that data so that we can review it every year to see that we've continually improved what we do. And just finally, it's really important for our organisations, and most of them are here, and I found the process in the last 12 months, meeting with industry organisations, very interesting. We must put pressure on our organisations to stay completely committed to sustainable beef production. Without their support, it's extremely difficult for businesses, single businesses, to hold their head up high and say, we do things really well, unless we get the support of industry. And I think, certainly the LPA changes and whatever, that's a real plus. But I guess right across the whole spectrum of sustainability, including the economic, the social and community, we need to support our producers and our beef industry players. And that's the website address for Australian Sustainability Framework if you'd like to go and have a look, and I urge you to do so. So thank you, Rob and Darren. Appreciate it.
Is there any questions?
Good. Thank you very much for your talk. I'm not trying to be critical here, but I'm focusing on animal welfare. Now, it seems to me that what you're doing is trying to put a whole lot of fires out. Now, the fires I'm talking about were, first of all, we had the television expose of, first of all, in Egypt, then in Indonesia, and then lately in Vietnam. Now, as far as I see this was caused a little bit by, well, totally by industry, by giving those people knocking boxes, which had no restraint whatsoever, and have to be used, or they're designed to be used, with a captive bolt pistol, but there was no captive bolt pistol. Now, what I'm suggesting to you is that, Blind Freddy would know that these people wanted to kill them either by halal or kosher methods. They needed to cut their throat. They either needed to turn around and use some form of restraint, which would mean a crush, or else there had to be a conversation had with them saying, if you don't do it the way we want, we're not going to sell you the animals. Now, you can't turn the clock back, but what I'm suggesting is, what are you doing to talk to those bodies, which is MLA, the live exporters, to see they don't make a mistake again?
And I think it's probably part of a bigger question. I think that's a whole, and certainly not my role to do that. And this sustainability committee is certainly not tasked with doing that. But what it is, it's actually, rather than being reactive, we're now trying to be active. We're trying to look ahead to what those issues might be. And at the end of the day, anytime you're trying to improve and trying to do things a whole lot better, you will have that approval and social licence on your side so much more than if you've decided not to have anything to do with that process. And SCAS was set up in order to provide that comfort to the general public. And I remember certainly when the live export expose was on, I was sitting at a hairdresser in Brisbane, and I was dying about the comments I heard from city people and put us all into this terrible, brutal, dreadful beef producer sort of group. And I remember thinking at the time, I never want to hear that sort of thing about my industry again. So I think it's the being active and progressive and thinking ahead about what might lie ahead, what might be the dangers and the issues. And it's not putting out fires. That's exactly what this framework is all about. This industry has for too long put out fires, and without very little support in terms of communication, things being ready. MLA has done a fabulous job in providing communication messages, trying to build that sort of Facebook presence and whatever, and try and tell our story for us. We need to catch up with that, and we need to get those messages right as well as an industry.